At 6:00 am, the HOA president was actually gauging my rainwater barrels with a tape measure, but for Veronica Hartwell, measuring was insufficient. I emerged onto my porch in my bathrobe only to see her wielding a crowbar with frenzied energy, shattering holes in each of my 6 custom rainwater barrels. Crack, a mix of the garish orange industrial paint she had spray-bombed over everything, and hundreds of gallons of water now flowed across my driveway. A poisonous orange stream, the metallic report of the crowbar striking plastic resonated in the early morning quiet. The pungent, synthetic odor of industrial paint seared my nostrils as I witnessed the real-time demolition of $800 worth of my equipment. Water and orange paint eddied around my bare feet, frigid, slick, and reeking of vandalism. She glanced up from her destructive work, crowbar still in hand, her designer blazer streaked with paint, and she genuinely smiled. How would you react if someone assaulted your property with a crowbar at sunrise? I shouted in the direction of my security camera. Share your most extreme HOA horror story in the comments. Where are you tuning in from? Does your state permit HOA presidents to carry out felonious destruction of property? I had believed that collecting rainwater was an act of environmental stewardship. It turned out to be a conflict costing $15,000 that I never anticipated. My name is Jake Thornfield, and 3 years ago, I believed I had discovered paradise in Willowbrook Estates, Colorado. After witnessing my wife Sarah's 2-year, grueling battle with cancer, I was in desperate need of tranquility. She had long envisioned a large garden where we could cultivate vegetables for the local food bank. Her method of contributing even as her own body was failing. After Sarah's passing, I purchased this property explicitly for its 2-3 acres and the established water rights from a 1940s ranch. The rich aroma of Colorado earth combined with the mountain air served as my form of therapy. Every tomato I cultivated, every pepper I picked for the food bank felt like a tribute to her memory. A monthly contribution of 200 pounds of produce, that was the vow I made to her. Willowbrook Estates promoted itself as a community that maintained a rural ambience while protecting property values. The majority of residents had bought into this vision. Impeccably kept lawns, uniform mailboxes, and HOA-sanctioned everything. My only desire was to tend my garden in peace. Then, Veronica Hartwell arrived, akin to a meticulously organized whirlwind. Veronica, 47, the newly elected HOA president, drove a white BMW that shone with the cold precision of a scalpel. She was a former real estate agent from California who held the conviction that standards build value. She carried an iPad and a tape measure with her everywhere, like armaments, always attired in business casual. Even during her Saturday morning compliance checks, her fixation was aesthetic uniformity and the optimization of property values, which evidently made my legal water rights her personal crusade. The initial assault occurred on a Tuesday in March. The sharp sound of gravel shifting under her designer heels signaled her approach like a series of rifle shots. She was accompanied by the newly formed Environmental Compliance Committee, a trio of neighbors clutching clipboards like they were riot shields. "Mr. Thornfield," she declared, her potent floral scent that conflicted harshly with my garden's earthy fragrance, "a discussion about your water situation is necessary." Her manicured fingernails tapped against my screen door as she handed me a 47-page supplement to the HOA bylaws concerning water resource management. My calloused hands held the preposterous document as the morning sun reflected off her iPad, which she used to photograph every barrel, every plant, every single drop. "Rainwater collection fosters mosquito breeding habitats," she asserted, dismissing my conspicuous filtration systems, a $500 impact assessment fee, in addition to monthly monitoring charges of $50. This supplement had been approved at a special meeting for which the notification, sent via email, had mysteriously never reached me. This was democracy HOA style. Here is what incensed me. My retirement income amounted to $2,400 per month. Sarah's medical expenses had depleted our financial reserves. This property represented my sole asset. Relocating was not an option I could afford. I could not handle these exorbitant charges. A single missed payment would lead to foreclosure, meaning I would lose everything Sarah and I had built. However, Veronica had made a significant error in judgment. You see, for 30 years, I had been engineering citywide irrigation networks throughout Colorado. My knowledge wasn't limited to water law. I had a deep understanding of the state's entire water infrastructure, which included some rather compelling details about Willowbrook Estates of which she was certainly unaware. As her BMW smoothly drove off, I went to my tool shed and retrieved a dust-covered folder labeled Property Survey 1943. It contained the documents that would alter the entire situation. Water pressure. I smiled, feeling the familiar weight of Sarah's wedding ring on the chain around my neck. She has no concept of what genuine water pressure entails. Veronica's subsequent action came more swiftly than I had anticipated on Thursday morning. She appeared with official documents and her trump card, Derek Hartwell, her brother-in-law, who also served as the HOA's legal counsel. Derek embodied the stereotypical corrupt attorney from a movie set. Slicked back hair, an expensive suit that declared, "My hourly rate is $400, and a patronizing grin that instinctively made one protective of their valuables. "Mr. Thornfield," Derek stated, his cologne so potent I could almost taste it, "you are in breach of state water regulations as well as HOA covenants. You are to cease and desist all water collection activities at once." The sharp rustle of legal documents being presented in the morning air felt like a physical blow. They had come with a surveyor's tape and handled my property as if it were a scene of a crime, recording each barrel with GPS coordinates and timestamps. Veronica's camera shuddered incessantly, compiling her evidence, one infraction photograph after another. "Daily fines of $200 will commence without delay," Derek went on, addressing me as if I were a bewildered old man incapable of understanding complex terms. "State water rights do not take precedence over HOA covenants. Sir, you have 48 hours to empty these barrels, or we will initiate foreclosure proceedings." The situation grew increasingly absurd. They gauged each barrel's diameter, height, and capacity as if they were NASA engineers calculating fuel for a rocket. Veronica maintained a violation log, noting which plants I irrigated and at what times. She even went so far as to allege that my vegetable garden was in violation of the requirements for ornamental landscaping. While they were engrossed in their inspection, I saw my mail carrier, Ron Castellanos, lingering in the vicinity, feigning the organization of letters after the legal contingent departed. He came over with the somber look of a person delivering unfortunate news. "Jake," he said in a low voice, casting nervous glances around. "She's using these same methods against 3 other households. Margaret Wu was cited for having too many bird feeders, Tom Kowalski for parking his company truck in his own driveway, and Elena Rodriguez because her children's playset was not the approved color." That was the moment it all made sense. This was not arbitrary enforcement but a calculated campaign of harassment aimed at driving people from their homes. It was time for my counteroffensive. I dedicated Friday afternoon to the county library, where I was surrounded by ancient legal tomes that smelled of aging paper and neglected justice. The librarian, Mrs. Sophia, assisted me in searching through Colorado's water law databases. The information I unearthed made my engineer's heart race. Reminiscent of my first water rights case 3 decades earlier, I had discovered then that the state's doctrine of prior appropriation was etched into the very Constitution. First in time, first in right. Water rights are a form of property right that is conveyed with the land deed and cannot be negated by subsequent contracts. It was final. My property possessed senior water rights that went back to 1943, rights that, under the Colorado State Constitution, legally overrode any HOA covenant. The ranch belonging to my grandfather had been gathering water for decades prior to the existence of this neighborhood. It seemed Derek's prestigious law degree had omitted the section on constitutional water law. That Friday, I submitted a formal grievance to the Colorado Water Court, cementing my legal standing beyond any question. Following that, I had security cameras installed around my property, as a gut feeling told me Veronica would not react well to this development. My intuition was confirmed. The security footage from Saturday night captured precisely what I had anticipated. At 2 a.m., Veronica and Derek, clad in dark attire like covert operatives of the suburbs, were once again measuring my barrels, this time with flashlights and clipboards. The audio recording was perfectly clear. The old fool is unaware that we can initiate foreclosure due to ongoing infractions, Veronica hissed, her voice laced with the particular spite reserved for those who defy authority. "Just record everything," Derek answered, his pricey shoes making a crunching sound on my gravel. "As soon as the fines reach $15,000, we can compel a sale." They were constructing a fraudulent legal argument in the middle of the night, fabricating proof of infractions that would serve as a pretext for seizing my property. The metallic click of Derek's measuring tape in the darkness sounded like the closing of handcuffs. But they had made one pivotal error. They had presumed I was just another elderly individual who would meekly give in and fade away. On Sunday morning, I contacted Margaret Wu. It was time to assemble my own coalition. Veronica's desperation became apparent almost instantly. Monday morning saw an emergency HOA meeting that was convened, voted upon, and put into effect with a speed that outpaced a typical pizza delivery. The result of the vote was 3-2 Veronica, Derek, and her associate Patricia against two neighbors who had actually taken the time to read the bylaws. Their latest creation was the immediate violation resolution protocol, which, despite its official-sounding name, was essentially a plan to seize my house more quickly. Unpaid fines would now be subject to an 18% monthly interest rate, compounded on a daily basis. The substantial pile of legal documents that landed in my mailbox on Thursday felt like a harbinger of financial ruin. Derek initiated foreclosure proceedings as a preventive measure. He asserted with that slick smile, within a mere 5 days, they had placed a lien on my property, marking it like a scarlet letter. The metallic flavor of alarm filled my mouth as I worked out the 18% monthly interest on these trumped-up fines. But Veronica's true expertise lay in a campaign to defame my character. She initiated a smear campaign that would be the envy of political strategists. I was suddenly being portrayed as mentally unstable and stockpiling water as if preparing for an apocalypse. She contended that my vegetable garden was drawing vermin and spreading disease throughout the neighborhood. Apparently, my tomato plants were considered a form of biological warfare. Then came her ultimate move, reporting me to the county health department for unhygienic water storage methods. When the health inspector showed up on Thursday afternoon, it seemed half the neighborhood had convened. Like vultures drawn to a carcass, every single barrel passed the inspection without a single issue. But the harm had been done. I was now seen as the eccentric old man who was a source of trouble for the neighborhood. The manipulation of the community escalated with masterful skill. Safety alerts were issued, warning of potential breeding sites for the West Nile virus. Concerned neighbor gatherings were held at her residence, complete with wine and cheese. Insurance companies began to mysteriously identify my address as a high-risk location. She had employed neighborhood politics as a weapon with exacting accuracy. In the meantime, I was formulating my counter-strategy. When I called Margaret Wu on Sunday, she responded as if she had been anticipating this confrontation throughout her retirement. It turned out that the individual cited for the bird feeders was a retired patent attorney who possessed the fierce persistence of a honey badger and a legal mind of Supreme Court caliber. Jake. Her voice was alive with excitement. I've been looking into our HOA ever since they came after me. Are you interested in a very savory detail regarding Veronica's election? On Tuesday evening, gathered at Margaret's kitchen table amidst a sea of legal papers and coffee potent enough to awaken the deceased, she revealed her startling discovery. During my time in municipal work, I had learned that in Colorado, a quorum of 10% of residents is mandatory for any major property-related votes, a fundamental democratic safeguard I had contributed to drafting for water district elections. The vote on Veronica's water addendum had only 23 residents in attendance out of a total of 312, falling far short of the legal requirement. The whole legal basis for their actions is as unstable as quicksand, Margaret declared with a grin, pushing the supporting documents across her table. Invalid votes cannot supersede constitutional rights. It's as simple as that. My own inquiries uncovered something even more revealing. After weeks of calls to my real estate connections in California, a portrait of dire financial straits began to emerge. Veronica was on the brink of personal bankruptcy due to some soured investments. Her immaculate BMW was a lease. Her house was burdened with a mortgage that exceeded its value. Her business was barely afloat on the fumes of commissions. Her harassment of neighbors was not a quest for power. She was engineering compulsory sales to secure funds for her own survival. Tom Kowalski and Elena Rodriguez came to our resistance meeting on Wednesday night. Tom's background in construction provided him with a keen understanding of property manipulation schemes. Elena's position in county planning gave her privileged access to development proposals. We came to the collective realization that we were not just isolated incidents. We were methodical victims in a coordinated scheme of property expropriation. It's a textbook real estate con, Tom stated in a low voice, his large, calloused hands making Margaret's small coffee cups seem even more fragile. They manufacture issues, compel desperate measures, and then capitalize on the ensuing turmoil. The irrefutable evidence I needed was delivered by the security footage from Thursday at 3:00 a.m. Veronica moved stealthily across my land, clutching household bleach as if she were a suburban saboteur. She systematically tainted each of my water barrels, manufacturing the proof she needed for her complaints to the health department. The recorded audio was invaluable. "We need him gone before the other homeowners learn about the development agreement." Development agreement? My heart pounded in my chest as the chemical vapors ruined weeks of painstakingly collected rainwater. Yet her admission was worth more than every single contaminated gallon. This was no longer just about water. It was about the methodical ruin of a community for financial gain. It was time to give her a lesson in genuine water pressure. Veronica escalated to a public defamation campaign that was worthy of a political campaign headquarters. She put together a neighborhood safety forum at the community center, which was complete with folding chairs set up like a courtroom and a projector screen that exuded an air of officialdom. She managed to get county officials, police, and local media to attend, having enticed them with the promise of a major news story. The woman had prepared a PowerPoint presentation with the title, "The Hidden Dangers of Unregulated Water Collection," featuring charts, graphs, and altered photographs that transformed my humble arrangement into something resembling the water treatment plant at Chernobyl. She had digitally manipulated pictures to show my barrels overflowing in non-existent storms, alleging that I was inundating my neighbors with contaminated runoff. "Concerned citizens have a right to protect their investments," she stated to Channel 7 News, her voice dripping with feigned sincerity. The camera was captivated by her sharp blazer and businesslike manner, while I was portrayed as the local oddball whom everyone made an effort to avoid. Her skill in manipulating the media was almost an art form. Posts on the Nextdoor app warned of chemical contamination that posed a threat to children and pets, and signed flyers began to mysteriously show up at every residence. "Stop the water hoarder before he destroys our community." The high-quality paper and expert printing hinted at a significant financial investment behind the smear campaign. The personal assaults went beyond simple harassment. The tires of my truck were slashed in the middle of the day while it was parked at the grocery store. "Sell and leave" was spray painted on my mailbox in that characteristic orange spray paint. The metallic, chemical odor persisted for days, an olfactory reminder of a threat that refused to dissipate. Then, Veronica executed her crowning achievement in fabricated emergencies. During her sophisticated dinner party the previous Saturday evening, she dialed 911 to report a smell of toxic chemicals coming from my property. Fire engines, hazmat units, and police vehicles arrived with sirens blaring, approaching my vegetable garden as if it were a major hazardous incident. Naturally, no chemicals were discovered, but the event was the headline in Monday's newspaper. "Water collection prompts emergency response." My counteroffensive was built on meticulous record-keeping. Security cameras now covered my property with the precision of a military operation, recording every late-night incursion by Veronica's unskilled sabotage team. Her teenage son, Kyle, had managed to accumulate a rather extensive criminal history, introducing fish, adding bleach, and scattering fertilizer to induce algal growth in pristine water. The audio recordings were of a quality suitable for prosecution. Derek was heard guiding Kyle via earpiece radios. "Make the smell worse, but be sure not to leave any fingerprints." They had clearly consumed an excess of crime dramas and an insufficient number of engineering documentaries. Margaret's in-depth legal investigation uncovered the conspiracy that Elena had suspected, concealed within the county's planning archives. An application for a commercial development in Willowbrook was awaiting approval. The project necessitated an 85% approval from residents or the forced sale of individual properties at prices above their market value. Veronica's struggling real estate firm had secured exclusive sales agreements that were worth millions in much-needed commissions. "She is not just picking on random neighbors," Elena clarified during our urgent meeting on Thursday. As she laid out the development blueprints on Tom's garage workbench, she is methodically removing any obstacles to the most lucrative deal of her professional life. The community started to divide, with many siding with Veronica, until her safety forum failed in a dramatic fashion. When neighbors posed detailed inquiries about the science behind water collection, she sidestepped them with emotional appeals concerning property values and the safety of children. Tom refuted her technical assertions using genuine engineering expertise. The results of my water quality tests indicated that every one of my barrels contained water that was purer than the Municipal tap water. Following the forum, 3 more neighbors who had been targeted approached us. They had been subjected to methodical harassment campaigns that were identical to our own. Anyone who owned desirable land or had deep roots in the community was being subjected to the full force of Veronica's tactics. It was a synchronized attack intended to crush opposition and compel sales. Margaret's complaint about ethical violations set off an investigation by the Colorado Bar Association into Derek's glaring conflicts of interest. It is unethical for an attorney who is also a brother-in-law to represent an HOA while also benefiting financially from the ousting of its residents. It appeared his expensive legal education had neglected the chapters on professional ethics. The definitive proof came from my mailman, Ron, who had been discreetly logging Derek's deliveries of violation notices for several months. Each citation was issued to a property that held the greatest potential for development, a clear pattern that demonstrated methodical targeting instead of authentic enforcement. As I stood at my kitchen window on Friday evening, I observed Veronica's team setting up a massive white tent for the garden party scheduled for the next day. High-end catering trucks, professional audio gear, and sophisticated table arrangements were all being meticulously arranged in an area I recognized as a natural floodplain. The investor presentation for the following day was set to declare a neighborhood-wide endorsement of the development. The executives from Denver were anticipating signatures, champagne, and assured returns. In its place, they were poised to receive an education in hydrology. The revelation that altered the course of everything came on Saturday morning. Margaret showed up at my kitchen table just as the sun was rising, holding a manila folder as if it were the Holy Grail. Her instincts as a retired patent attorney had taken her on a legal exploration that yielded something truly explosive. "Jake," she said in a hushed tone, her fingers trembling as she laid out yellow documents on my table. "This is more than just a fight over an HOA violation. The fate of the entire neighborhood's water supply is in your hands." The original 1943 ranch deed, which had been lost in the county archives under layers of bureaucratic neglect for decades, bestowed upon my property the riparian rights to the upstream portion of Willow Creek, which included complete control over the water's flow and its allocation. The legal terminology was from a bygone era, a time when water was the deciding factor between affluence and ruin. My coffee cup paused in midair as the gravity of the situation hit me like a splash of icy water. My small 2-3-acre parcel came with the legal authority over an earthen dam upstream that was a century old. This dam was the source of the small lake that supplied water to every fountain, pond, and irrigation system in Willowbrook Estates. Every ornamental water installation, every verdant lawn, every promised lakefront investment opportunity depended entirely on my personal judgment, perpetual easement for irrigation and flood control. Margaret recited from a brittle piece of parchment that carried the scent of aged leather and forgotten authority. The musty smell of the historic papers, combined with the aroma of the morning's coffee, created a heady fragrance of impending justice. These rights have priority over all property developments, HOA covenants, and municipal regulations. The constitutional revelation hit me with the force of an explosion. The prior appropriation doctrine of Colorado, which had been unassailable since the state was established, placed water rights above all other property claims. The incorporation of the HOA had unlawfully disregarded these pre-existing easements. Derek had intentionally left out the protections for these easements when he filed the legal documents, betting that no one would bother to investigate deeply enough to find them. On Saturday afternoon, Margaret and I made the quarter-mile trek upstream, navigating through pine trees and granite formations. The earthy aroma of decaying pine needles and the sound of flowing water intensified with every step we took. We came upon a basic earthen dam equipped with manual release gates. It was not an elaborate setup, just 2 concrete channels managed by steel wheels that were turned by hand and had become green from years of disuse. As I stood on the dam's concrete spillway, I could feel the powerful tremor of 2.8 million gallons of water pushing against the century-old structure. The force vibrated up through the soles of my boots like a colossal, steady heartbeat. Those seemingly harmless release gates could, by law, be used to inundate the entire lower section of the neighborhood during the irrigation season, which my deed specified as any time I considered essential for farming. The technical possibility of it all was a source of joy for my engineer's spirit. This was not a mere fantasy of vengeance. Colorado law required yearly upkeep of earthen dams for safety. To ignore the need for pressure relief could lead to a disastrous, uncontrolled breach. which would wipe out the neighborhood rather than just give it a temporary lesson. The timing was as if it had been orchestrated by the gods of water themselves. The weather forecast predicted clear skies through Sunday. Veronica's garden party was scheduled for Saturday at 3:30 p.m. Right in the middle of the historical flood zone. My responsibility was to perform the necessary dam maintenance whenever its structural stability was at risk. As I stood there, feeling the force of the contained water against my hands while I checked the release wheels, the moral justification became perfectly clear. This was not about causing harm to the community. It was about demonstrating the distinction between honoring established rights and methodical exploitation for financial gain. Margaret's research supported my authority, which took precedence over every HOA rule, city ordinance, and property agreement in the county. Water rights were a constitutional foundation that no private entity could challenge. The irony was so exquisite it nearly made me laugh. Veronica had used water regulations as a weapon against me, yet her whole development enterprise was dependent on water that I held dominion over. The next day's investor presentation would be touting exclusive lakefront properties to individuals who would be standing in a floodplain that I could flood with a mere turn of a wheel. She had chosen the wrong neighbor to provoke. The following day, everyone would gain an understanding of prior appropriation in a manner they would not soon forget. It was time to release the floodgates of justice. Margaret's dining room was converted into our command center on Saturday evening. Legal papers and topographical charts were laid out on her grandmother's mahogany table like military strategies. The strong fragrance of her Colombian coffee mingled with the musty odor of county documents as we meticulously planned the following day's lesson in water management. Tom Kowalski showed up with engineering surveys and elevation maps that resonated with my background as an irrigation engineer. Elena Rodriguez supplied the county's regulations for dam upkeep, official records that would shield us from any potential legal repercussions. The feel of the professional blueprints was a familiar comfort to my calloused hands as we planned every last detail. Operating the dam is not an overly complex task. I clarified for my dubious companions as I pointed out the historical flood paths on Tom's elevation maps. Earthen structures need a yearly release of pressure for safety reasons. It's a standard engineering procedure that has been a legal necessity since 1943. My collection of photos from the spring floods of 1995 depicted a legitimate seasonal water flow that precisely covered the area where Veronica intended to host her party the next day. From my earlier work designing municipal systems, I was aware that correct dam management is crucial to avert catastrophic breaches that could result in loss of life. This action was not about retribution. It was about responsible upkeep of infrastructure, executed at the most opportune moment. Margaret submitted official documents asserting our prior water rights to the county, creating a solid legal record that demonstrated our good faith management of the dam. The distinct sound of official seals being applied to legal documents was like justice finally being heard. Each signature provided a layer of legal safeguarding that Derek's prestigious law degree could not overcome. Elena proposed that we inform certain neighbors as a gesture of goodwill and to limit our liability. We focused on families with young children and elderly individuals, giving them a 48-hour notice to evacuate, presented as a safety precaution during standard maintenance. The objective was to eliminate any risk to people while achieving the greatest educational effect. Tom's construction team supplied us with professional-grade machinery, portable pumps to regulate the water's release, emergency communication devices for coordinating efforts downstream, and generators to power the dam gates. The metallic sound of high-quality tools being arranged was like an orchestra getting ready for the next day's event. Our safety procedures were developed with military-like precision. Tom identified every basement area that needed to be evacuated. Elena liaised with the county's emergency services, who believed this to be a standard infrastructure project. Margaret composed detailed liability waivers that would protect us from any lawsuits related to property damage. The sequence of events was timed with exquisite mechanical precision. Thursday at 6:00 a.m. The legal notices would be posted. Thursday at 8 a.m. Direct notifications to neighbors would begin. Friday at 3:00 p.m. A press briefing on the water rights demonstration. Saturday at 2:45 p.m. A final safety check. Saturday at 3:00 p.m. The required dam maintenance would get underway. My internal conflict over the possible property damage to innocent neighbors almost made me abandon the plan until Margaret brought the larger context to my attention. A brief inundation versus the permanent ruin of our community? Jake, she said, sometimes you must crack a few eggs to save the entire farm. The engineering details were flawless. The dam's capacity was 2.8 million gallons, which was at a dangerously high level. The maximum safe rate of release was 50,000 gallons per hour. The flooding would last for 3 to 4 hours to ensure the entire party location was submerged. The anticipated water level in the party area was between 6 and 18 inches. A costly inconvenience, not a perilous event. Our investigation uncovered the supreme irony in Veronica's chosen party theme: waterside sophistication. She had laid down temporary wooden dance floors on the grass, put up white fabric tents, and placed fragile catering equipment at the very lowest point of the terrain. Her pitch to the investors was for exclusive lakefront development opportunities. My moral compass was set by my memories of Sarah. That evening, as I stood in her memorial garden, I laid out my plan to her gravestone, with the scent of her cherished roses perfuming the mountain air. She would have desired for me to shield our neighbors from being taken advantage of, I murmured, my fingers brushing against her wedding ring on the chain I wear. The aspect of community benefit was vital for our media strategy. I intended to leverage the attention from the next day's events to promote education on water conservation, to put forward a proposal for neighborhood rainwater harvesting systems, and to create a scholarship fund for environmental engineering in Sarah's honor. This was not an act of destruction. It was an act of community preservation with an educational purpose. The aroma of Margaret's coffee brewing during our late-night strategy sessions fostered the ideal environment for our plotting. The sound of papers being shuffled as we examined legal precedents blended with Tom's soft-spoken explanations of flood control techniques. My weathered hands followed the drainage routes on the maps, while Elena confirmed the county's notification protocols. The sight of Veronica's extensive party preparations, captured by my security cameras, was almost too good to be true. White tents were being erected like bullseyes in the floodplain. Expensive catering vans were arriving with delicate machinery, and professional lighting was being set up in spots that would be submerged by 4:00 p.m. the following day. She is completely unaware of what is about to flow her way, I said quietly, observing her as she supervised the final touches through my binoculars. The woman was, in effect, orchestrating her own downfall while plotting mine. On Friday evening, I performed my final preparatory act. I went to Sarah's grave as the setting sun bathed the Rocky Mountains in hues of gold and lavender. The crisp mountain air was filled with the fragrance of pine and the feeling of what was to come, as I prayed for the fortitude to act rightly for our community. Tomorrow, they will discover the true significance of water. I pledged to her memory, sensing the dual weight of legal power and moral duty. This was about safeguarding everything we had created together. Everything was flawlessly arranged for the next day's display of true water pressure. Veronica's alarm set in on Thursday evening upon finding my dam maintenance announcement displayed at the community center. The stark white document, bearing an official county letterhead, was effectively a death sentence for her presentation to investors. By Friday morning, she had convened an emergency HOA board meeting. Her actions driven by the desperation of someone witnessing their domain collapse. Derek was frantically seeking an emergency injunction. The scent of his pricey cologne mingled with the sharp odor of panicked perspiration as he desperately tried to contact every judge in the county. However, Colorado's legal system does not grant restraining orders against water rights that are constitutionally protected, a principle that his law degree had apparently failed to teach him. At 6:00 a.m. on Friday, Derek presented me with an emergency cease and desist order that, despite its formal appearance, had no more legal standing than a supermarket voucher. The high-quality paper did not conceal the reality that no legitimate court would halt necessary infrastructure maintenance, particularly when a 72-hour notice had been given to all individuals who would be affected. This is a deliberate act of property destruction, Derek threatened, his voice quavering like an adolescent asking for a date. We will press criminal charges for intentional flooding if you go through with this act of terror. The attempt at bribery occurred on Friday afternoon when Veronica showed up at my house with a checkbook and a level of desperation that drives individuals to foolish actions. Her usually immaculate makeup was smeared, her designer blazer was creased, and her hands trembled as she offered me $25,000 in cash to delay the dam work for just 1 week. You can retract all the HOA violations, halt the foreclosure, and I'll even add a public apology. she stammered, her flowery scent unable to conceal the metallic tang of her fear. My security cameras recorded every single word, as she essentially admitted that all her prior legal maneuvers were nothing more than baseless harassment. Her efforts to rally community opposition escalated to a frantic pitch. She sent out mass emails to the residents, warning them of domestic terrorism masquerading as maintenance. She made posts on social media, labeling me an unhinged military veteran seeking retribution against blameless neighbors. She urged people to report me to the police for premeditated destruction of property. All the while, her own son was being recorded by my cameras as he attempted to damage the dam's equipment on Thursday night. Kyle, along with two of his friends, had tried to render the release gates inoperable with bolt cutters and spray paint, thereby providing evidence that would ensure any assault charges would hold. The metallic scraping of their tools against the steel reverberated in the mountain air as the adolescent offenders were acting on their mother's instructions. Sheriff's deputies were on the scene in a matter of minutes. The charges of trespassing, vandalism, and interfering with critical infrastructure carried the possibility of serious felony convictions. Derek's efforts to have the charges dismissed only served to expose further family malfeasance. The boys were unaware of the risk. He pleaded with the officers who made the arrest, while my security footage clearly showed Kyle being given detailed commands via earpiece radios. It seemed that 3 generations of the Hartwell family possessed the same criminal tendencies. On Friday, the attempt to sway the media ended in a spectacular failure. Veronica had arranged a press conference of her own, alleging I was an unhinged military veteran aiming environmental terror at blameless neighbors. But the local journalists had already done their homework on Colorado water law following my briefing on Thursday. Her pleas to emotion were no match for constitutional verities and the necessities of engineering. All the while, I kept a perfectly composed public front as the final preparations moved forward with military-like precision. Tom's team discreetly positioned their equipment near the dam on Friday morning, their expert coordination a sharp contrast to Veronica's disorganized state of panic. A county dam safety inspector made his prearranged visit and verified that immediate maintenance was a legal necessity for the dam's structural soundness. The outcome of the inspection was a stroke of beautiful irony. An official safety directive was issued by Inspector Martinez, mandating a water release over the weekend due to hazardous pressure levels resulting from the recent snowmelt. To fail to maintain the dam is an act of criminal negligence. He clarified to the bewildered reporters. Mr. Thornfield is not making a choice to flood anything. He is legally bound to avert a catastrophic failure of the dam. Elena's coordination with emergency services was executed without a hitch. The county authorities regarded this as a standard infrastructure project, which was precisely what it was. Emergency teams were informed of the schedule and safety measures, with no reference to garden parties or real estate machinations. The professional management of water resources was met with a professional emergency response. Margaret came with me to Derek's office on Friday afternoon, her legal papers causing him to visibly perspire through his high-end suit. "You are not permitted to use restraining orders to obstruct legal duties," she stated, with the calm demeanor of someone instructing a supposed lawyer in basic law. Derek came to the realization that his entire plan was founded on a flawed constitutional premise. The community's support for my cause grew at a rate Veronica could not manage. 17 neighbors were now actively backing my assertion of water rights, having found evidence of their own harassment. The informal meeting at Tom's garage on Friday evening brought to light a systematic pattern of targeting that made our opposition appear to be a community-wide revolt. On Friday evening, the atmosphere was perfectly charged for the events to come. The wind, gaining strength as it moved through the pine trees, caused the water in the dam to rise and lap against the retaining walls. The crisp, pure fragrance of melted mountain snow mingled with the sounds of Veronica's chaotic party preparations, which were clearly visible across the floodplain. My hands were firm on the dam's controls during the final check, while the party lights cast a glow on the area that was soon to be a disaster zone. The final layer of legal defense was impenetrable. Margaret had submitted a comprehensive set of documents to all the appropriate agencies. Insurance providers were informed of the required upkeep. Law enforcement was made aware of the legitimate infrastructure activities. Every potential liability had been professionally and thoroughly addressed. At 11 p.m. on Friday, I observed Veronica's team putting the finishing touches on the tents, right in the direct line of the flood. The lights from their work created a strange, theatrical scene of impending retribution. The weather report confirmed that Saturday would be clear for the water education seminar. The lesson of the next day would be one to remember. Saturday dawned with impeccably clear skies and a quality of mountain air that imbued the air with a sense of possibility. I was up before sunrise for a final inspection of the dam, sensing the powerful tremor of 2.8 million gallons of water pressing against the century-old structure. The water level had peaked overnight, reaching a critical point. Any delay in maintenance would now carry the risk of a catastrophic, uncontrolled breach that could wipe out the entire neighborhood. Tom's team showed up at 8:00 a.m. with professional flood management gear that shone like medical tools in the morning light. Margaret arrived with the last of the legal papers, which would safeguard everyone involved. Her manila folders were filled with a constitutional authority that no HOA lawyer could successfully contest. The crisp mountain air was scented with pine needles and the promise of impending justice. The irony of Veronica's final preparations was perfectly clear from my kitchen window. The caterers showed up at 9:00 a.m. with a setup worth $15,000, featuring delicate white silk tents that were placed directly in the path of the seasonal flood. Like sophisticated bullseyes, the expensive sound system, set up at the very lowest point of the terrain, was destined to be the initial victim in this lesson on hydrology. Everything must be perfect for the investors. Veronica's voice echoed across the floodplain as she supervised the arrangement of crystal glasses and tables draped in linen. Her designer shoes tapped against the temporary wooden floors that would be adrift by 4:00 p.m. Sarah Sophia, an environmental journalist, came at 10:00 a.m. For our prearranged interview on water rights, her camera team took up positions on elevated ground, affording them an ideal vantage point of both the dam's operations and the party setup. The metallic sound of professional camera equipment was like justice being captured on film. Elena managed the final safety precautions for the residents with military-like precision. Families with children were taken to the local shopping center for a precautionary afternoon of entertainment. The elderly residents were moved to the community center for a demonstration on emergency preparedness. Tom positioned volunteers at strategic lookout points, each equipped with a radio to ensure constant communication. Margaret's legal preparations were unassailable. The final documents, submitted to the county authorities, provided me with complete immunity from any liability and confirmed the necessity of the dam's maintenance. The sheriff's department acknowledged the legitimacy of the infrastructure work. Every potential legal obstacle had been foreseen and countered with fundamental constitutional principles. Professional flow meters, which had been installed during the night, were set to record the controlled release rates for any subsequent legal challenges. The emergency shutoff mechanisms had been tested at dawn and were in perfect working order. Medical teams were on standby at the community center, prepared for any possible injuries. Even though the floodwaters were not expected to rise above an adult's knees, the synchronicity of the timing was like poetry in motion. Veronica's presentation to the investors was scheduled for 4:00 to 5:00 p.m., focusing on waterfront development opportunities. My window for the dam's maintenance, a necessary pressure release, was from 3:00 to 6:00 p.m. This perfect alignment of schedules was designed to have the greatest educational effect on who truly held sway over the neighborhood's water supply. Derek's last-ditch effort came at 1:00 p.m. in the form of an emergency court order that was, in fact, a complete fabrication. No judge was on duty on a Saturday, and in any case, legitimate courts do not issue restraining orders against constitutionally protected water rights. It seems his costly legal training had failed to teach him the distinction between genuine authority and mere wishful thinking. The growing support from the community was a heartening sight. By 2:00 p.m., neighbors had started to congregate at the designated viewing spots, a combination of allies eager to witness justice and concerned residents seeking to understand water law. Local environmental organizations were there to document this landmark assertion of prior appropriation doctrine with a professional zeal. The sensory experience grew more intense as the appointed time drew near. A string quartet, warming up in the pavilion below, produced wistful tunes that would shortly be silenced by the sound of surging water. The fragrance of high-end catering mingled with the crisp mountain air, as champagne flutes were set out in neat lines across the flood zone. The sunlight catching on the crystal and silver was like diamonds indicating the targets. At 2:45 p.m., County Inspector Martinez gave the final technical go-ahead. The dam structure demands an immediate release of pressure for the sake of public safety. He stated to the assembled press, "This is a necessary maintenance procedure, not a discretionary act of property management." His formal declaration would shield us from any future legal disputes. As I stood at the manual release controls, the feel of Sarah's wedding ring on the chain around my neck was a tangible reminder of the clear moral justification for my actions. This was not about vengeance. It was about education on the importance of respecting established rights, while also meeting the legal requirements that ensure everyone's safety. Margaret's discussion with Martinez confirmed what my engineering knowledge had already told me. Earthen dams require yearly maintenance to avoid catastrophic failure. The only alternative to a controlled flood was an uncontrolled dam breach that would result in loss of life, not just the destruction of costly party decorations. The interview with reporter Sophia yielded the ideal soundbite. Water law serves to protect communities from being exploited by establishing constitutional priorities that cannot be superseded by any private entity. It was a technical lesson presented in a way that was understandable to an audience who had likely never heard of the prior appropriation doctrine. The final countdown commenced with military-like precision. At 2:55 p.m., all safety systems were verified as fully functional. At 2:58 p.m., a final visual check confirmed that Veronica was in the flood zone below, greeting the investors from Denver. At 2:59 p.m., my hands were firm on the century-old release controls that would instruct everyone on the true meaning of water pressure. At precisely 3:00 p.m., I initiated the required dam maintenance that was destined to alter everything. At 3:00 p.m., on the dot, I operated the professional release valves with a deliberate, ceremonial exactness. The metallic protest of century-old steel resonated through the valley, like a church bell heralding the arrival of justice. A flow of 50,000 gallons per hour started to move downstream, accompanied by a deep, controlled roar that was music to my engineer's ears. Reporter Sophia's camera skillfully documented both the engineering process and the advancing surge of mountain water. Beginning required dam maintenance for structural safety, I declared into her microphone, my voice as firm as the granite around me. This is infrastructure work required by law, not an act of personal vengeance. By 3:15 p.m., the party attendees started to notice atypical aquatic noises coming from the pine woods, and their champagne-fueled chatter subsided as the distant rumbling intensified. Veronica casually dismissed their apprehension with a strained laugh that echoed across the floodplain. "It's merely the decorative fountain system going through its cycle. Nothing to be concerned about, gentlemen." The investors from Denver looked on, impressed by what they believed to be upgraded aquatic displays. While Veronica's presentation carried on in the pavilion, Tom's lookouts were sending radio updates from their positions. Water is now entering the floodplain as planned, and the depth is rising at a consistent rate. At 3:20 p.m., the first signs of the flood made their way to the party site, appearing as a gentle flow that skirted the edges of the pavilion. The clear mountain water formed fleeting streams across the well-kept lawn. The catering staff began to notice the ground becoming saturated beneath their costly buffet arrangements, and their pristine white uniforms started to show signs of the encroaching moisture. The string quartet persisted with their performance of Mozart as the water began to lap against the instrument cases, like a steadily advancing tide. Veronica was still in a state of utter disbelief, her voice climbing in pitch. "It's just a small overflow from the irrigation system, nothing of consequence at all. The water features are simply more impressive than we anticipated." At 3:25 p.m., the water level had risen to 4 inches throughout the party area. With the certainty of a natural principle, the white silk hangings of the pavilion started to draw the water upwards, forming abstract, watercolor-like designs as the luxurious material soaked up the flood. The investors, now lifting their Italian leather footwear, began to ask sharp questions regarding evacuation plans. While Veronica was on the phone in a panic, trying to reach Derek. "You must put a stop to this right now," she shrieked into her phone, her flawlessly done makeup starting to run in the moist air. "This is a calculated act of terror, not upkeep." At 3:30 p.m., the inundation began in full force, as the water reached a depth of 8 inches and continued to rise uniformly across the entire party area. The catering tables started to drift like elaborate rafts, and $15,000 worth of fine food was swept away across the floodplain. The sound system emitted a series of sparks and then fell silent, the electrical crackles serving as a punctuation to Veronica's mounting hysteria. The guests, in their high-end attire, scrambled for higher ground. Champagne flutes were left behind in the advancing water, which caught the party lights and sparkled like a field of scattered diamonds. The spectacle was at once both lovely and gratifying. A display of nature reasserting its dominance over manufactured opulence with the full backing of constitutional law. At 3:35 p.m., reporter Sophia was delivering a live account of the enforcement of water law as it unfolded. Her professional tone captured the significance of the event for the historical record. What we are observing, she said, is the execution of water rights a century old, which take precedence over any private property contracts, including HOA covenants. The camera focused on Veronica, who was standing ankle-deep in the flood, yelling at the departing investors who were now far more concerned with reaching dry land than with real estate ventures. Her white blazer was drenched, her designer shoes were ruined, and her entire development project was being submerged in the melting snow from the mountains. At 3:40 p.m., I reached the flood observation point and, using a megaphone, began to offer a calm, informative commentary to the assembled crowd of 50 neighbors. This is the controlled maintenance of critical infrastructure. My voice resonated across the water with the assurance of an engineer. The alternative would be a catastrophic failure of the dam, which could have wiped out our entire community. Margaret was by my side, holding legal papers that affirmed our complete constitutional right to be there. Her demeanor exuded a legal certainty that no amount of HOA intimidation could undermine. Tom was in charge of the emergency gear, while Elena was in communication with the county officials, who confirmed that this was a legitimate infrastructure operation. At 3:45 p.m., the inevitable showdown occurred. Veronica, soaked and enraged beyond reason, charged up the hill towards us, her meticulously crafted image crumbling away like her water-damaged makeup. Derek trailed behind her, clutching his meaningless, counterfeit legal documents. The two of them were a flawless visual representation of corrupt power colliding with foundational constitutional law. The live media broadcast captured this historic clash. The HOA president versus the holder of constitutional water rights, with 50 people as witnesses and professional records to prove who truly held the power over the neighborhood's resources. "You have ruined everything," Veronica screamed, her ruined clothes dripping water. "This is criminal terrorism." "Ma'am," I responded with the calm of an engineer. "This is required dam maintenance, entirely within the bounds of Colorado constitutional law." Derek brandished his worthless papers as if they were flags of surrender. "We have court orders." "Those are forged documents," Margaret retorted with legal exactitude. "No legitimate court grants restraining orders against constitutional water rights." A wave of assent rippled through the crowd as the truth triumphed over deceit. Reporter Sophia documented every single word, while County Inspector Martinez provided official validation of the maintenance's necessity. "Ladies and gentlemen," I addressed the cameras and the assembled neighbors. "This is a demonstration of why water rights are so important. Constitutional safeguards are in place to prevent precisely the kind of methodical exploitation that you have just seen." At 3:50 p.m., my definitive statement was made as Veronica's development project was literally and metaphorically submerged around us. Prior appropriation dictates that the first in time is the first in right. My water rights have precedence over your property schemes, your HOA harassment, and your criminal sabotage. This is the outcome when one trifles with constitutional law. The floodwaters continued to swirl around her ankles, as justice made its way downstream. By 6 p.m., the managed flood had subsided, leaving in its wake drenched pavilions, water-damaged catering gear, and the utter ruin of Veronica's development ambitions. The investors from Denver left in their rental cars, their Italian leather footwear making a squelching sound with each step, and vowed to never again take calls regarding the Willowbrook commercial development. The immediate results surpassed even my most optimistic expectations. Derek was confronted with ethics violations by the Colorado Bar Association, which effectively ended his legal practice in a matter of months. Kyle's acts of vandalism resulted in a community service sentence, where he was tasked with the upkeep of the very dam he had attempted to destroy. The most gratifying outcome was the permanent cancellation of Veronica's real estate license, due to a pattern of harassing neighbors and issuing fraudulent legal menaces. Margaret's meticulous records ensured our complete legal immunity. Every step we took was constitutionally sound, properly announced, and carried out with professional precision. The county authorities commended our outstanding maintenance of the infrastructure, which had averted a catastrophic dam failure. The insurance companies settled the flood damage claims without any dispute, as we had meticulously followed all the necessary protocols. The change in the community was nothing short of a revolution. Within a fortnight, 17 neighbors had lodged complaints of harassment against the HOA, which resulted in a total overhaul of the board. Tom Kowalski was elected president. Running on a platform of constitutional rights and the protection of the community, Elena Rodriguez took on the role of secretary to guarantee that all future votes would adhere to the correct legal procedures. Margaret set up the Willowbrook Constitutional Rights Clinic in her own dining room, where she provided free legal counsel to neighbors who were in conflict with the HOA. Our situation set the benchmark for the defense of property rights, with legal professionals from 3 different states coming to study our methods of documentation. The environmental legacy is a perfect tribute to Sarah's memory. Colorado State University has joined forces with us to establish the Sarah Thornfield Water Rights Education Center, a place where engineering students can learn about the application of constitutional law for the safeguarding of a community. The scholarship fund has already provided support for 5 students who are dedicated to protecting water rights from being exploited. 6 months down the line, Veronica showed up at my house, humbled, insolvent, and employed at a garden center after her own avarice had cost her everything. "You saved me from becoming a monster," she stated in a low voice. "Thank you for intervening before I could ruin more lives." Even those who were once adversaries can discover a path to redemption through an education in the Constitution. The consequences of our actions are still spreading across the country. Our experience has motivated communities all over America to look into their own rights and stand up to methodical harassment. Our case was referenced in legislative sessions when new laws were being considered to bolster the rights of property owners. 5 states have now passed prior appropriation protection acts, which prohibit HOAs from infringing on constitutional rights. Today, my garden yields more than 400 pounds of produce each month for the food bank. Sarah's aspiration of providing for families in need is now a reality, far exceeding what she could have ever hoped for. Every tomato that is cultivated, every pepper that is picked, serves as a testament to the fact that safeguarding the rights of individuals is what makes entire communities stronger. The dam now undergoes its yearly maintenance, which is now a cause for community festivity rather than contention. School children come on educational visits, where they learn about the water cycle, constitutional law, and the power of individual bravery in the defense of everyone's liberty. The floodplain has been transformed into an open-air educational space, a living demonstration of the enduring strength of democracy. But this is not an isolated incident. It is happening all over America. Regular people are engaged in similar struggles against minor despots intoxicated with perceived power. Next week, I will be sharing Maria's story of how she utilized the law of adverse possession to take back her stolen driveway from an HOA that believed property theft was within their rights. A little preview. Constitutional law holds some wonderful revelations for bullies who neglect their studies. Tonight, as I stand in Sarah's memorial garden, observing the stars come out over the Rocky Mountains, I sense her spirit in every living thing around me. We have safeguarded our community, upheld constitutional law, and built institutions that will benefit the generations to come. Water invariably seeks its own level. The same is true for justice, and at times, they both arrive with the irresistible momentum of a natural force, sweeping away corruption and fostering new life. Post your most extreme HOA horror story in the comments section below. Let's find out who is up against the most absurd petty tyrants. Your story could be the focus of a future episode. And be sure to hit that subscribe button for HOA to become one of the thousands of viewers who are discovering how knowledge of the Constitution can triumph over neighborhood corruption. Information is powerful, and that power is accessible to those with the courage to wield it. Always remember, they cannot take what they do not realize you possess. That's it for this installment of HOA Madness. If witnessing justice being served brightened your day, please hit that like button, leave your comments below, and don't forget to subscribe. Additional unbelievable community confrontations are coming soon.